Okay, and I think we're live. And today, before I return to the Quran, I just wanted to address some things because this was brought up in another forum. I wanted to address the problems with Dawah and Islamic apologetics and why um, there's such a huge barrier to communicating with defenders of Islam. And you saw this in the Christian Prince Mohammed Hijab encounter. Let's say the fact that he wasn't even able to really engage. I think Christian Prince did a good job. As did David Wood, but the problem in the David Wood debate was David Wood came prepared to engage in an actual debate, and Mohammed Hijab came to engage in theatrics and turn what was ostensibly a debate into the Jerry Springer show. And at the heart of this problem is the fact that there's very little substantively to defend about Islam. So most of these encounters devolve into some sort of puerile attack on the Christian apologist, high, love, and light, and the character of whoever happens to be debating, whether it's David Wood or Christian Prince or it's someone else during the encounters in Speaker's Corner, the Christians there. So it devolves into thanks, Alejandro. It devolves into some sort of attack on their character or a Soko films. Yeah, the he documents these, and almost all of these encounters wind up the same way. Some Muslim Wahhabi or Sunni Muslim screaming and shouting at the Christian and making these false equivalencies. And there was a great example of this with a Muslim recently who tried to bring the Bible down to the level of the Quran and to the level of Muhammad. And they don't understand that that's really not possible. They, first of all, they approach it from a completely skewed perspective because they've never read the Bible. They don't understand what it is. They don't understand. They think it's the equivalent of the Quran, at least for the purposes of their debates. They don't understand that it's not, and they think that whoever um, when it discusses the prophets or the patriarchs, that these people are the equivalent of Muhammad, and they're not. Muhammad, when you really look at it, he is, and I said this, he's a degenerate in almost every sense of the word. And it's not just that he falls short of biblical values because he didn't have a relationship with God. He falls short even of the values of non-believers and his contemporaries, his other Arab pagans. He falls well short of their values. And in fact, if you can think of a modern equivalent, it would be a combination of a someone like Joseph Kony, a warlord who goes around raiding and killing people and enslaving people, and Jeffrey Epstein. So Jeffrey Epstein is someone who's universally loathed. He's despised even by the left, uh, the segment of the left that advocates things like drag queen story hour and putting young children onto hormones to change or alter their sex. Really deviant things. Even those people, if you came up to one of those people and asked them what they thought of Jeffrey Epstein, they would they would describe him as a loathsome individual. They might not be able to give you a coherent or cogent moral explanation, because a lot of them are moral relativists. They wouldn't be able to give you a cogent explanation of why he's bad, but they would describe him as evil. So even those people would describe him as evil. But Muhammad, if you can imagine Muhammad was a worse person than Jeffrey Epstein, someone who's universally reviled. And this is someone who Muslims seek to emulate. They think that he is the perfect man, even though in the Quran, the person described as Jesus or Isa is described as sinless. They think that Muhammad, the one who's described and whose sins are accounted, is a perfect human being. So you have to understand that when you're approaching Islamic apologetics, this is the person they think should be emulated. And they also, even though they deny it, they really do worship and venerate this person. And this is why you're told to believe in Muhammad, unlike any other person who's esteemed as a prophet or a really stellar individual. In the Quran, you're told to believe only in Allah and Muhammad. And the reason you're told to believe in him is because he is seen as a figure of worship. And that's why you're prosecuted. All of the blasphemy prosecutions, and there are a few exceptions, but almost any blasphemy prosecution you find in the Middle East by the government, these people are being prosecuted for impugning the integrity of Muhammad or attacking Muhammad or slandering Muhammad. You see very few, if any, people in these countries who are being prosecuted for slandering Allah or attacking Allah. It always has to do with attacking Muhammad or doing something to the Quran, usually some spurious allegation that they've destroyed the Quran or torn the Quran, the pages of the Quran. And this extends to extrajudicial attacks. So when someone like Asia Bibi in Pakistan is attacked and threatened with death, she's being attacked based on questioning the integrity of Muhammad. She asked a Muslim, "What did Muhammad ever do for you?" And then went on to describe his how he was a perverse man. So she basically stated the truth, and that's why she was attacked. But she stated about Muhammad, not Allah or the figure Muslims considered to be God, which is an illustration of how Muslims actually do esteem Muhammad as a god. They really do. It's really a religion based around worship of Muhammad, even though Muslims will go to great lengths to deny this. And this is the reason why Muslims, up until relatively recently, up until the 20th century or thereabouts, Muslims were called Mohammedans in Europe and in the West. They were referred to exclusively as Mohammedans. They weren't called Muslims or worshippers of Allah, because the religion really does involve worshiping Muhammad. Allah existed. Allah was a pagan god well before Muhammad co-opted it. The difference about Islam is the exclusivity of Allah, but primarily it's the veneration of this figure Muhammad, a religion that does involve Allah, but also involves Muhammad and venerating him and following his model. And the model you're following is the model of someone who engaged in sex slavery, adultery, pedophilia, possibly pederasty, even though there are no, we don't have firm evidence of that. You can infer when you read parts of the Quran, parts of the Hadith, that he might have also engaged in that, although I won't claim that it's for certain that he did. But you can infer from reading the Islamic traditions and the Quran, parts of the Quran. So Muslims are esteeming, and they're at least bordering on worship of someone who is worse than Jeffrey Epstein. So when a Muslim took offense at the fact that I called him a degenerate, it's simply he's taking offense at the truth. And this is one of the problems with engaging in a debate with a Muslim. They don't engage with debatable aspects of the Quran. Say the Muslims would say that in Surah 3, where it exhorts you to go and attack non-Muslims and to kill them and to attack them until they convert to Islam or desist from attacking Islam, quote unquote. They would say that was just a verse for that period of time, that it's not applicable today, and that non-Muslims are distorting that verse. Whereas we would say that that verse was never abrogated. That was one of the last surahs of the Quran to be written. So of course it's applicable to today. It was never abrogated, and it forms a key part of Islamic expansion. Without the threat of coercion, no one would become a Muslim, and the only Islamic converts you would have would be through reproduction, through having more children. But that's a debatable proposition. You could engage in a debate over what that passage means, but Muslims want to engage in debate over things that are ineluctable facts, inescapable facts that have that can be confirmed. So they want to debate about whether or not Jesus was crucified, even though everyone else on the planet except for Muslims agree that Jesus was actually crucified. They're the only people that deny it, and they deny it based on the word of someone who lived 6 centuries after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And they want to debate things like the ethics of Muhammad. They want to claim that this is a debatable issue, even though the Quran and the Hadith themselves give us evidence that Muhammad engaged in sex slavery, engaged in adultery, and justified his adultery through his own manufactured revelations. He engaged in pedophilia. These are things that are confirmed by Muslim sources, and they want to engage in that debate. So it really is a fruitless endeavor to try to go over that when you have someone that's not willing to even concede, or the fact that the Quran is riddled with errors. The idea that semen is created in the human vertebrae, the fact that mountains are planted there as tent poles or tent pegs and create earthquakes, even though mountains are really really the result of earthquakes. It's the complete inverse. They want to debate things that are that we can determine relatively easily just by these should be a priori. This should be a priori knowledge. There shouldn't be any debate over things that have already daif debate. Daif, yeah, Sahih versus Daif. Yeah, those type of things you can debate whether or not hadith, even something like rejecting the hadith. David Wood pointed this out, that Muslims who rely solely on the Quran are considered heretics. You can do that. You can reject these narrative traditions, but you would be considered a heretic. And if you do accept these narrative traditions, now the person that was who was making these claims presumably accepts the hadith. If you do accept them, then you have to agree that Muhammad was not was not someone that should be emulated. That he was that he was a degenerate, basically. If you, unless you're a moral relativist, and if you're a Muslim, presumably you agree that that there are that there is a certain morality you should adhere to, unless you're simply saying that morality is the inverse, the obverse of what we have in normal Western civilization. The idea that you shouldn't molest children, you shouldn't commit adultery. That's simply not true. So when Muslims uh, come to this fork in the road, what they have to do is make the Bible seem just as perverse as their Quran. They can't succeed in defending the Quran on moral terms, so they have to delegitimize the Bible by pointing to different people in the Bible who committed grievous sin, and they tried to say, God, your God, but because these people were prophets, or they were patriarchs, or they were or they were blessed in some way by God, the fact that they committed sin this way proves that the Bible is just as bad as the Quran. And there are a number of problems with this. One of them being the fact that even if what they were saying is accurate and their interpretation were accurate, that still doesn't make the Quran not perverse. It still doesn't make Muhammad not be a degenerate. Even if you can bring down the Bible to the level of the Quran, which you can't, it still doesn't make the Quran any less perverse, and it still doesn't make Muhammad any less perverse. But the main problem is it's simply a misinterpretation and a mischaracterization of the Bible, which happens because Muslims who use these dawah techniques don't read the Bible, and they don't understand the Bible. So, for example, this guy brought up Solomon and the fact that Solomon had hundreds and hundreds of wives and concubines and mistresses, and he didn't understand the fact that one of the reasons that Solomon was punished, not Solomon so much, but one of the reasons Israel was punished and divided into the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah, was because Solomon took many wives, particularly foreign wives, who led him into idolatry. So let me just read from 1 Kings and show you why this Muslim talking point is so absurd. So I'm going to go to 1 Kings 11, which describes this in detail. So it says, "But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his strange wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed after their gods. And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord commanded. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, forasmuch as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. Notwithstanding, in thy days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. So Israel was punished for just this very thing, whereas Muhammad is and why was it punished? Let me go to Deuteronomy 17, and I'll show you. Well, it was punished for one reason, because of his idolatry, and idolatry was something that God expelled the Canaanites from their land for, and ultimately he expelled the Israel from their land for this very thing. So in Deuteronomy 17:17, let me show you why this Muslim conception of the Bible is so wrong. So in Deuteronomy 17:17, it says, neither shall he multiply wives to himself. And if you go back to verse 15, it says, thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. And in 17 it says, neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart not turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. So you're told explicitly in the Bible what you should not do as king, and one of the things you shouldn't do is engage in polygamy. This is something that Muhammad claimed God himself ordered, and it illustrates why this Muslim talking point is so ridiculous, to claim that because there were people in the Bible who were prophets or kings or patriarchs who engaged in polygamy, that this somehow justifies polygamy, or renders belief the equivalent of Islam, the practice of Islam. It's absurd to make that claim when you actually read the Bible. And this is something Muslims should do. They should read the Bible, and they would realize how ridiculous their talking points are. There's nowhere where God encourages polygamy, encourages you to commit adultery. And in fact, things like polygamy, adultery, divorce, these things are praised in the Quran and praised by Muhammad. And in fact, he says he claims that they're divinely ordered, that you shouldn't object to these things. Just the same way, this is why Muslims defend Islam, because it justifies all of this ungodly behavior. And you can go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible in Genesis 3. In Genesis 4:23, Muslims claim that Adam was the first Muslim, even though it says in the Quran that Muhammad was the first Muslim. Putting aside this inherent contradiction, if you go back to Genesis 4, I think you'll find the first Muslim in Genesis 4:23. It said, and Lamech said unto his wives. So he is the first polygamist. Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. So Lamech was not only a polygamist, he not only engaged in polygamy, he was a murderer. So he was basically the first Muslim, even before Muhammad. It's amazing that Muhammad didn't use Lamech as the archetype. Forget Adam being the first Muslim. Lamech was the first Muslim if you go by his behavior. And And in contrast to that, Adam and Eve were the model or the type for a marriage, one man and one woman of one flesh. And Jesus talks about this in the Gospels. So in Matthew, let me see if I can just go there. In Matthew 19:4, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and he says, "And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. They say unto him, Why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and to put her away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. His disciples say unto him, If the case of the man be so with his wife, it is not good to marry. But he said unto them, All men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given. So this is a great contrast to Muhammad's approach to marriage, which is to marry in order to satisfy your flesh, to violate the biblical ordination of marriage and the way that marriage is ordered in the Bible and is modeled. One man, one woman becoming one flesh. It's the Muslim version is one man, many women, many concubines, many muta marriages or pleasure marriages, many many young girls or young boys, whomever. And that is all sanctioned by Allah. That's the Muslim model for marriage. Jesus's model for marriage is the model for marriage set out in the Old Testament. And it dovetails with the Bible because he's the author. So in Malachi 2:16, let me just flip to Malachi. Malachi. Okay, so in Malachi 2:16, it says, okay, in fact, let me go to Malachi 2, 14. It says, Yet ye say, Wherefore? Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant, and did not he make one? Yet had he the residue of the Spirit, and wherefore one, that he might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. So God is basically condemning false religions and false gospels that say you should engage in this type of behavior. And that is the main problem with Islam. It sanctions violence, it sanctions adultery, it sanctions just basically rejecting the scripture. It's antichrist. That's the main problem with Islam. It's an antichrist religion. So therefore it rejects Christ's teachings on marriage, on divorce, on these things. And this is one of the reasons that Muslims trying to defend Muhammad have such a hard time. That's why they resort to attacking Solomon or attacking David or attacking other people of the Bible, even people that their own book claims or prophets, they attack them because they can't lay a hand on Jesus, and they can't bring the Bible. They can't elevate the Quran, so they have to try and bring the Bible down to their level, and it fails. It always fails. It always fails. So, and you can just go through the Bible and find affirmation of these teachings. So in Ephesians 5:31, it says, um, 5:30 rather, for we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. It doesn't say three or five, or in Muhammad's case, 10. It says two. And in 1 Timothy 3, 1 Timothy 3, 1, it says, this is a true saying, if a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife. It doesn't say the husband of 10 wives, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. So I think I've demonstrated how backwards the Quran is. If you actually look at the Bible, you'll understand why these accusations by Muslim apologists fall on deaf ears. It's simply them trying to justify their own sin and their attachment to one of the most carnal people to ever walk the earth. In that passage in 1 Timothy, the husband of one wife, it's an implicit acknowledgement that there are men who have more than one wife, but that's not that's not Paul saying being a polygamist is a good thing. He's not giving some imprimatur of acceptance to polygamy. He's simply saying these people should not be in the position of a pastor or a bishop, because they're not, even if they're doing it through ignorance, even if they were polygamous before they were saved and now they're married to more than one wife, even if they did it out of ignorance, they can't be a someone to lead the church. It's impossible, because they'll still be polygamous, they'll still be married to one wife as pastor, and that's not something that's countenanced within the church, because it's not biblical, and it's not the order or the nature of things. And this is something that Muslims just don't understand. So when they start attacking a particular person in the Bible, they don't understand that because something is in the Bible, it doesn't mean that that behavior is licit, that that's something that we should emulate. For example, in the book of Judges is one of the worst. Is one of the books with some of the worst examples of human behavior. That's not a reflection upon God. That's not a black mark on God's character. The fact that humans engage in this awful behavior when they're disobedient to God or when they stray from God, that's simply an illustration of what happens when you withdraw from God's protection. It's an example of how even God's elect people can be punished because of their disobedience and their disconnection from God. And it shows you they keep falling into error and murder, adultery, and much even worse is depicted in the book of Judges. But that's not, because that's in the Bible, doesn't mean that God approves of that behavior. And this is something that Muslim apologists and Muslims in general just don't grasp, because they've never actually read the Bible and they don't understand the context. The fact that this is these are that these are that this is a narrative, a continuous narrative over 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 many centuries, written in 3 different languages, over 60 books, but one continuous narrative. And it's not simply a bunch of books that were cobbled together by a by a religious cult leader like Muhammad did with the Quran, and plagiarized from all sorts of different sources and combined. It's one continuous narrative written through different people who are all inspired by the Holy Spirit. And this is why there's such striking continuity in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. So many things that fit together. The condemnation of people binding themselves, to the law, or making promises to live by the law and not being able to do so. That's something that you see in Nehemiah and in Paul's epistles, which were written centuries later. It's why you see so many messianic promises in the book of Isaiah and Jeremiah and the prophets that were later fulfilled by Jesus Christ. It's why you see, um, the teachings on marriage that in Genesis and Malachi. It's why you see them affirmed and enhanced in the in the Gospel of Matthew and in Paul's epistles, because this is one continuous narrative written by the same person, or inspired by the same person, and written by people in who were all inspired by the Holy Spirit. Oh, thank you, Love and Light. Yeah, definitely share this with anyone who might be curious. Uh, Hi, First Corinthians. Yeah, the golden cow. Ryan Morrow did a video, the Mountain of Moses, which where he actually goes to Saudi Arabia and depicts some of the etchings, the stone pictographs that show a people in exile worshiping these gods, the golden calf. And this is something that you weren't able to do until relatively recently, because Saudi Arabia had been closed off. But it actually does provide proof of the Exodus. There are a lot of people that love to poo-poo the claims of the Bible and say the Exodus never happened. There's no evidence. First of all, there is evidence. There's a lot of evidence, archaeological evidence and proof that people from Canaan lived in exile in or lived in Egypt. But secondly, there is proof of an exile, such as the pictographs you see in places like Saudi Arabia, and he wasn't even allowed to go into the area to walk around. He was restricted to a certain part of Saudi Arabia, but even that he was able to document pictographs depicting, the calf or worshiping of calves, and people obviously traveling. And so even he was able to document, even with those limitations, was able to document uh, what really does mirror the description in Exodus of a people leaving Egypt and being led into the wilderness. And so uh, being led to this place, which corresponds to the land, the Gulf, near the Gulf of Aqaba. So where you would find, so even with those limitations, he was able to document things that do mirror descriptions of what you see in Exodus. But yeah, even back then, you could see worship of false gods. So Islam is not um, there's nothing new under the sun. So Islam. That's why Islam bears such a similarity to other false religions, and even going back all the way to the days of Israel. There were no Muslims, as the Quran claims. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph weren't literal Muslims, and they didn't worship Allah, but there were false religions that had some of the same characteristics of Islam. Anyway, I just wanted to address that because it occurred recently. The discussion over, you know, the Bible is corrupt and it's just as bad as the Quran because it depicts people engaging in sinful behavior. I just wanted to address that because it's such a ridiculous Muslim debate tactic. But again, this is used because it's hard. The Quran is indefensible on its own terms, so you have to attack the Bible. You have to try to bring the Bible down to that level, the level of the Quran and Muhammad, and it's simply impossible. Like I said, Muhammad is a degenerate, and that's indisputable. If you agree with the Islamic tradition, the Hadith, the Quran, if you agree with the historiography of Muhammad, then you would have to also agree that he's a degenerate by any objective measurement. He's worse than Jeffrey Epstein. So that's really not a dispute. Muslims may get angry when you say that, but it's a simple truth. They can get angry all they want. It doesn't erase the fact that Muhammad was a terrible human being. That's simply beyond dispute. We're not talking about an interpretation of a particular surah or a textual or theological dispute, which could be open to discussion. Muhammad's actions are very well documented. Anyway, so I just wanted to address that, and I'll get back to the Quran next time. And I'll see you all. Like I said, if you like these videos, feel free to um, share them with Muslims, non-Muslims, whomever. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see you next time.